What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to Talking Mets at Rob with another Mets Offseason Report right here on the channel. Hopefully, everybody's having a good Thursday night, and we got a lot to speak about our New York Mets. The topic of the day for Mets Offseason Report is the top 5 needs of our New York Mets. So don't forget to please hit on that like button. And if you're a new subscriber of the channel, welcome to the channel. And hopefully you keep on coming back for more for all the Mets offseason news, rumors, and breaking news all throughout the offseason, along with Mets Hot Stove that starts right after the World Series is over, and also MLB free agent frenzy throughout the offseason as well. We all know how much fun the MLB free agent frenzy is, especially when we get through the GM meetings and the winter meetings is always a lot of fun throughout the offseason, and that is a big component of my channel, and it's always a lot of fun. So we're going to have Mets Hot Stove a couple of times a week, and we're also going to have MLB Free Agent Frenzy a couple of times a week, along with a couple of podcasts. Obviously, the Mets Roundtable podcast going throughout the offseason, as well as the Shade Bridge show as well. So you're going to see a lot of Chris, a lot of Nelson, a lot of Hayden. Of course, you got to subscribe to their channels as well, as they bring great content to the Mets content throughout YouTube as well. So let's get started to exactly what the New York Mets top needs are. I put it on the screen on your left. You have to look at it in certain perspective. You got to break it down here because the Mets need a lot, right? The two top things is pitching in general, definitely rotation and definitely bullpen, right? There's not a lot of bullpen arms that were trusted in the 2023 season, and that's one of the things the New York Mets really need to focus on, in my opinion, when it comes to pitching and exactly what the bullpen needs. We know Edwin Diaz is coming back. We know that Drew Smith cannot be trusted. We're going to see if Ottavino is going to opt into his contract. That is something that we also have to look at as well. And looking at the free agent targets, looking at trade targets that are on the right of your screen, you can see where I'm going when it comes to arms in the rotation, arms in the bullpen, and it can involve trades. It can involve free agency, and that's a lot we're going to look into today. So let's start with the rotation. And before we start with the rotation, at the bottom of your screen, we get the top GM candidates, in my opinion, that I believe David Stearns is going to look at going forward if he decides that he wants a GM under him. And of course, the top managerial candidates. I picked 3. Obviously, Craig Counsell is the quote unquote favorite to get the Mets job. They haven't really with him in Milwaukee, really haven't decided on what they were going to do, and they haven't really came up with a contract extension. So you just assume that they have been speaking, and Craig Counsell is probably going to be the New York Mets manager unless unforeseen circumstances when Stearns is allowed to start interviewing other managerial candidates, which will be after the World Series. You know, I do think Joe Espada, who was one of the finalists a couple of years ago to be the Mets manager, Pat Murphy, who is the bench coach under Craig Counsell with the Milwaukee Brewers, is another candidate that I think is going to get high praise for David Stearns, knowing that he does know Pat Murphy. And a lot of Met fans will probably like Pat Murphy, especially the ones that always talk about, Wally Backman, who is a fiery manager. Pat Murphy has the bench coach. So he is a fiery type of guy who managed in the minor leagues and is now the bench coach for the Milwaukee Brewers. He will probably get interviewed as well. And again, if you take David Stern for his word, he said it's going to be a wide net when it comes to managerial candidates. So it's probably going to be a somewhat of a long process. I don't know how long. I would think probably throughout November he's going to do a lot of interviews. I think he would want the manager in place by the time the winter meetings come, which is around right before, it's about a week or two before Christmas. I think it's the 12th to the 15th, if I'm not mistaken, as the Diamondbacks just tied a game in the 7th inning in Game 3 in Arizona. So that's where we are right now, right? I would be shocked if it's not Craig Counsell as manager. GM is much up in the air because we really don't know, right? We really haven't heard much on the front of David Stearns if he wants a GM or not. But I think you need a layer to every title. I think you need it. When it comes to good organizations, you got a owner, you got a president of baseball ops, you got a vice president, and all that fun stuff, and you got the GM as well. I think you need steps here, and you need layers, right? I think there needs to be good communication, good back and forth. Just having David Stearns, even though we all believe that he can be a good executive, having nobody to question his decisions or question his possible moves, I worry about that, because we've seen the problem with Billy Epler. Not that saying if Billy Epler was a bad GM or a good GM, it's just that there was nobody to question him except Steve Cohen. And Steve Cohen, who is fairly new to baseball, he was trusting a guy who's been in baseball a long time. I think with David Stearns, I think there needs to be somebody else to talk together and to have that difference of opinions on certain players, on certain trades, certain free agents. I think that's extremely important. And when the Mets were successful, the very little successful years they had in their franchise, they had organizational steps. And I think it's important to have that. The most successful franchises have that. They have a VP, they have a president, they have a GM, and all that stuff as well. Obviously, the owner. That's where I see it as. So, with that said, the Mets GM candidates, Kim Ng is very interesting. I just did a video on that, and I go into detail about her career resume and why I think the Mets can find a way to actually get her to become a GM, or even if it's like a VP, that's just under Stearns. That obviously the president of baseball operations is David Stearns. Give it a VP of whatever, player development, or VP of president, VP of baseball operations, or something like that. I do think. Really want to get her in here, because you see what she did with the Marlins with the limited resources. The trades that she made at the deadline, obviously everybody thought that was a good move with Robertson. It didn't work out, but at the time it was like, wow, the Marlins actually, got one of the best relievers in baseball at the deadline. And obviously they got Berger, they got Bell as well. That helped them get into the playoffs and get that wild card spot. Didn't end up very well in the playoffs with them, but they made the playoffs, unlike the Mets. So I do wonder, when it comes to the GM candidacy, what they're going to do. Obviously, James Click was the Astros GM as well. Ben Sestanovich is the assistant GM under Anthopoulos of the Atlanta Braves. That's always executives you would like to pick from organizations, knowing that how good the Braves organization has been at developing players and signing the right guys, trading for the right guys. So Sestanovich is actually an interesting candidate. Chaim Bloom, we all know what the disaster was in Boston. His first big move, what I think a lot of people are worried about with David Stearns, Chaim Bloom's first big move was trading Mookie Betts to the Los Angeles Dodgers, which was a complete and utter disaster, right? And Matt Klentak is a guy that's in the Rays organization that is very analytical, a guy that is a player development guy as well. So when it comes to David Stearns, and I want to bring this up before we go into the top needs for the Mets and go into the free agent targets and the trade targets. And if you got any questions, concerns, opinions, write them in the comments and we'll talk about it throughout this 1 hour offseason report. So David Stearns, what people are starting to worry about with David Stearns, remember, there was not a lot of people, a lot of Met fans that did not want David Stearns. All you heard was people saying, you got to get David Stearns in. You got to get David Stearns in. What if David Stearns' first big move is similar to what Chaim Bloom did and is what David Stearns might do and trade Pete Alonso? All the people that wanted David Stearns and his first big move would be to trade Pete Alonso. Again, I'm not saying that I want to trade Pete Alonso, but this is a fresh mind coming in to an organization that has failed. Let's be honest. He is coming into an organization that has a core that signed Nimmo, McNeil, Lindor, that has failed. They failed in the wild card. They failed in 2023. They failed in 2021. 2022 was an outright disaster from September all the way into the wild card. And this year was a complete disaster. They bringing in a new mind that has no emotional connection to any of these players, I think is not a bad thing, no matter what David Stearns do. Even if you believe that David Stearns trading Pete Alonso away is the worst decision known to man, and it's the worst decision at that moment, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the wrong move, because you just don't know, right? Yeah, it's always prospects you're going to get back. But what if Pete Alonso brings you back that elite talent, that one top prospect that is just a no-brainer, right? You can look at around the Hutchmans of the world, look at all the Brewers of the Orioles prospects, and you look at it that way as well, right? What if it's that one top prospect that can be all world, that is can't miss? And I know you could say that about any top prospect. Oh, they're all can't misses until they're not. But what if you get that one player that is, a Aaron Judge type, a Carroll type, a player like that? Obviously it's hard to replicate what Pete Alonso has done, and I understand that. But you also have to look at the fact that what if Pete Alonso, because remember, it takes two to tango, right? It's not the Mets just offering him, years in money, right? It's also Pete Alonso and Scott Boras budging from what they want, right? I'm sorry. You don't give Pete Alonso 10 years, $300 million unless you have no choice. What choice is that? Let Pete Alonso play out the season. Because if he has a season like Aaron Judge and has a historical season, well, guess what? You're probably going to have to pony up, right? That's fine. But what if he has a Michael Conforto contract season? Well, guess what? The Mets are probably going to save a lot of money there, right? So, in my opinion, if I'm the Mets, I will let Pete Alonso play out the year, because if, just like Brandon Nimmo, if the Mets really want Pete Alonso, there is nobody that's going to outbid Steve Cohen if they really want to keep Pete Alonso around, right? So no matter what any team, if there is a team there that wants to give, say the Cubs want to give 10 years, $300 million to Pete Alonso, and Steve Cohen's like, all right, we'll give you 10 for 310, 10 years, $310 million. Right? I don't think he's going to get outbid. If Steve Cohen doesn't want to get rid of Pete Alonso, there is no need for him to pony up a big contract extension just because it appeases the fans. How about not worrying about appeasing the fans and doing what's right for the organization, short term and long term? That's where the way you have to look at it. And bringing in David Stearns, a fresh mind that has no emotional connection to any one of these players, is a big deal. Yeah, Paul, I understand that, but you know what? There was a lot of Mets fans that wanted the Mets to make a move in 2021, and guess what? They made a move. And you can blame Sandy Alderson for that. The Mets were never good enough in 2021, and that was the bigger problem. Not that they made that trade. That wouldn't have been a bad trade if the Mets were actually, that Pete Crow Armstrong for Javi Baez trade, that type of trade needed to happen in 2022 when you were one of the best teams in baseball, knowing you were going to make the playoffs, fighting, trying to keep that division and getting better while you're going into the playoffs. That's the type of trade you move. That 2021 trade made no sense because the Mets were never good enough. That's why I was mad about that trade. They made a bigger trade in 2021 than they at the deadline than they did in 2022, when the 2022 Mets were astronomically better than the 2021 team. That's why I was so upset when it came to that. Yeah, Richard, that's fine. But I'd rather have a guy bring in his own guy. I don't care about internal candidates or anything like that. I don't care about that. You need relationships, you need cooperations, you need good communication. The problem with Buck Showalter and Billy Epler clashing probably for 2 years now was the fact that these guys were Billy Epler didn't bring in Buck Showalter, right? I think that was the main thing. It was basically Steve Cohen doing that, right? You need a guy that's on the same page with whoever is running things at the top, executive level wise. You need a guy that your president of baseball ops can trust, right? If he trusts Craig Counsell, again, I don't necessarily think Craig Counsell is a great manager, but if he trusts Craig Counsell, and you can't, no matter what you think of the NL Central, Craig Counsell has done a good job with the Milwaukee Brewers. Again, I don't think he's a good playoff manager, but Buck Showalter wasn't either. Dusty Baker at one point wasn't a good playoff manager either until he actually had a good team on the field in the Houston Astros, right? So I think we're looking too much into the managerial situation because it's not as important as it once was. But there is no mistake that Craig Counsell has done a good job with the Milwaukee Brewers. Yeah, I saw that, Anthony Bazinski. I did see that report today. Um, that is interesting. The first base coach for the Blue Jays. Yeah. He's interesting. He's been around the league. He's in the dugout. Again, I need somebody that has in-game experience in the dugout. You don't have to be a manager. You can be a first base coach, third base coach, pitching coach, bench coach, anything that has experience in the dugout, I'm okay with. Right? That's why Pat Murphy is an interesting candidate. That's why Joe Espada, who is the bench coach for Dusty Baker with the Astros, Pat Murphy is the bench coach for the Milwaukee Brewers under Craig Counsell. Those type of guys, you saw Joe Girardi with Rob Thompson. Those guys with in dugout experience is what this team needs. We don't need a first-time manager. That's why whoever keeps on talking about Carlos Beltran, give him, if you want to give him a bench coach role or some type of role in the dugout, that's fine. A hitting coach or something like that, fine. But a first-time manager is a problem with this team. You can't have a first-time manager and you're trying to win. It's a dangerous game to play because if that manager is not good, all of a sudden you're firing another manager. I don't want that. Oh, Robert, how you doing, buddy? It is something that you have to look at. You got to get an experienced guy in the dugout. Somebody who has been in the dugout before. I think that is very important, especially with this team. So, obviously, the three candidates that I have is Counsell, Espada, Murphy, and then obviously Budzinski as well. I didn't put him on there because until it starts going a little bit, after the offseason, that name popped up. He is one of the wide net candidates. Budzinski is probably going to get, that news came out of somewhere. Was it Budzinski's agent? Was it David Stern's leaking that? We'll see. Well, Anthony, that is interesting, to be honest with you. I would be a little shocked if it's not Counsell. That could be leaning towards more Counsell not wanting to be there, not wanting to manage this season and wants to take the year off. So we'll see. Again, that would be interesting if it's not going to be Counsell, because now, it's got to be guys like a couple of guys I mentioned, Budzinski and other guys. God knows how many other candidates there will be. So, I just don't want it to be a first-time head coach, not manager, head coach, or a coach, first base, third base, bench coach, hitting coach. Anybody that's been in the dugout, I'm okay with. I will be okay with. Because I don't know what do I know Joe Espada because he's been under a couple of really good managers, championship teams? Does that mean he's going to be a great manager? No. But I know he's been in the dugout. He's worked under really good, great managers with great teams. I like that. Tanya, I'm not saying the Mets are not going to trade Alonso to the Cubs. It doesn't matter who it is. The fact of the matter is, all the Met fans who wanted David Stearns, if David Stearns makes the decision that he believes for the better of the organization, short and long term, that trading Pete Alonso is the right move because of whatever the reason he has, I don't want to hear the Met fans who wanted David Stearns turn against him right away when you shouldn't. Because you wanted him here. You think he's a bright baseball mind. Don't kill him for it if he does it. Because it might not be the wrong move long term. Yuki PCA is, you can't just get PCA. You need at least 3 top 5 prospects. I mean, Pete Alonso is one of the best power hitters in baseball. Like that's not something to, just to give away for one top prospect. That's, I mean, the Mets got a top prospect for Scherzer, even though they gave him money. I mean, that's crazy. The Mets got 2 top 10 prospects for Verlander. Well, Ron, I understand the whole fact of a manager that knows how to manage a bullpen, but you also got to have guys that you can also trust as well, right? You could be the best manager in baseball. I mean, how many times did we see Brian Snitker be considered one of the best managers in baseball, and he looked like a disaster in the playoffs the last 2 seasons? You know why? Because his bullpen sucked. I mean, is Rob Thompson a great bullpen manager? Or is it the guys in the bullpen actually doing their job? Every manager is going to look like a genius when the bullpen arms do their job. That's the way I see it. Bullpens are a crapshoot, right? The Phillies bullpen wasn't good all season until it was in the playoffs. The Mets bullpen was considered one of the best last season, but it actually didn't matter because the starters didn't do their job, right? So it comes down to the fact that the bullpen is a crapshoot. That's why when people are like, oh, you got to get, like, everybody wanted Andrew Chafin, including myself. He was a disaster this year. So how good he would have been in the Mets uniform. So it comes down to the fact that you just pray that the guys you bring in or that you bring up for, say, the minors, there's a guy that everybody's talking about, a 12th rounder, that I'm going to be doing a video on in the next coming days. And Anthony, obviously he's knowledgeable, Subway to Shea. Make sure you subscribe to his channel. He knows who I'm talking about. I'm going to be doing a video about him very shortly of he can be an interesting bullpen addition from our minor league system who currently pitched for the AA Binghamton. So that's a situation there where there can be internal candidates that you can add to your bullpen as well, not just free agents or trades. You see, David Bednar is a guy that I have as well. And of course, the free agent, Josh Hader, who I will stay away from because I don't think he can pitch anywhere except the 9th inning. It's a dangerous game to bring in Hader for an 8th inning role when you're not going to move Diaz from the 9th inning. So that is something that we're going to talk about as well. So when it comes to the rotation, the top free agent targets is obviously Yamamoto, Ohtani, obviously not next year, but Ohtani, Imanaga, Jordan Montgomery, who is showing in the playoffs that he is going to get paid handsomely, as good as he's been ever since leaving the Yankees. He was solid with the Yankees. He's been one of the best pitchers. He's probably a top 10 pitcher in baseball throughout with the Rangers, and definitely one of the best pitchers in the playoffs so far. So it's going to be very interesting. So in my opinion, I do believe the Mets are going to make one big trade. And I'm not talking about trading away a guy like Pete Alonso. I'm talking about making a trade to send prospects to another team to acquire a pitching, either a pitcher or a guy like Juan Soto. I think that's going to happen. One of those are going to happen. The Mets are going to make a big trade. You don't acquire all these prospects. You don't have a top 5 farm system now because all those prospects can't come up to the big leagues. There's not enough room for all of them. So David Stearns has to make a decision on a guy like Beatty and Mauricio and Vientos and, the Cliffords, the Gilberts, the Acuñas of the world, and other guys in your top 10. They're going to have to make a decision who you want to keep and who you're going to use as trade chips to get better at the major league roster. That's what he's going to have to decide. And again, no matter if you want Ronnie Mauricio here or not, if David Stearns believes he's a better candidate to be a trade candidate, which I've been thinking for a couple of years now, then you gotta trust David Stearns, right? You don't want David Stearns and all of a sudden you don't like a move he makes and all of a sudden you're going against him. Trust him. No matter, even if I don't like a move. Look, I don't want to trade Pete Alonso, but if he trades Pete Alonso, I'm not going to say, oh, he's an idiot, because that move might be the best move the Mets ever made in many years. So we'll see. Yes, Yariel Rodriguez is pitching in Japan. He's a Cuban pitcher who's pitching in Japan right now. I'm also going to do a video about him. I'm going to, talk about his career, his stats in a video in the coming days as well. So there's going to be a lot of videos as well. So in my opinion, the best, and I think, Arizona just hit, this might be a double. All right, so Yamamoto, I think, is target number one free agent-wise for the Mets. I think the Mets' top target is Yamamoto. And if the Mets do get Yamamoto, which I'd be shocked if they don't, because I don't think if Steve Cohen has been targeting him probably for about a year now, nobody's going to outbid Steve Cohen for Yamamoto. And, he's young. So money and years really don't matter. You just hope that he turns out to be as good as, at least close to as good as he's been in Japan. And bringing him in with Kodai Senga, who's probably going to get a couple of Cy Young votes in the Cy Young voting. Bringing him in with Yamamoto, and then you have Quintana, you already got two top-of-the-line starters on your rotation, along with your back end of your rotation with Quintana. Now you got to fill up two more spots. Is that a Jordan Montgomery type? Is that maybe Imanaga, another Japanese pitcher? Is it another trade where you can bring in a Dylan Cease or Corbin Burns or Tyler Glasnow? Or the Mets go the more of the, the conventional route and go a little bit smaller in like an Aaron Nola, who's shown that he can pitch in big games in the postseason. Not great in the regular season, but is very good in big games, as you've seen in this postseason. A guy like Aaron Nola, something like that. That's a lot of Shane Bieber. I don't like, because I don't trust him injury-wise, and his production has gone down over the last couple of years, which worries me. So in that situation, I do think David Stearns has got to make a decision here. One big trade. Is it going to be a big trade for a top-line starting pitcher, or is it going to be a trade for Juan Soto? Don't think for a second. And again, people are like, why would you trade for Juan Soto when he's going to be a free agent after the 2024 season? Because I do believe Juan Soto is going to be traded this offseason. And if he's traded, the team that trades for him is going to be a team that can afford him. So if he gets traded to a team like the Yankees, the Dodgers, pick a team, Boston, whoever, whatever team can afford him, he is not going to leave that team. That team is not going to trade for him unless they have somewhat of a guarantee that they have exclusive negotiating talks, at least a few days, say a 5-day period, where they can talk to him about a long-term deal. So that's why you trade for him if you're the New York Mets, because you might not get that opportunity to sign him as a free agent, because that probably will not happen. Because no team is going to trade for him and give top 10 prospects for Juan Soto for a 1-year rental. That's not going to happen. And so the Mets would be stupid to not have that exclusive couple of days to talk about a long-term deal. That wouldn't make sense. Mullen, yeah, I understand that, but there's a lot of pitchers, like then you can't sign nobody. Then you can't sign Yamamoto because he has a ton of innings. Imanaga has a ton of innings. Montgomery has a ton of innings. Burns, Glasnow, Cease, all of them have a ton of innings. At some point, you just have to hope that they last. And again, it's not like Aaron Nola is going to be your number one starter here. He's going to be your number 4. Or possibly, you know what I'm saying? So you're not really going to have to worry about that too much, especially if you get Yamamoto. Can you make Aaron Nola your number 3? I'm not excited about that, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I do think that the Mets are going to either definitely going to sign one top free agent. If that's Yamamoto, which I think will happen, you have your 1 and 2. Your number 3 starter, I think it's somebody that's got to be a guy that can give you innings. And that's a guy like Aaron Nola. That's a guy like Jordan Montgomery. Those guys give you innings. And that's what you need to save your bullpen. And that's where I think the Mets are going to go. I think the Mets are going to make one huge signing, which might be Yamamoto or Ohtani, maybe. Or maybe even 2. I'm going to think of it this way. I think Yamamoto is almost a guarantee for the Mets. Ohtani, I think, is going to be very interesting. I think Steve Cohen is going to offer the most money. I don't know if Ohtani is going to come here. I think there's going to be one big, huge sign. Yamamoto, I don't see as a huge signing because that is an international type of quote-unquote signing, even though it's not using international pool money. I don't really consider Yamamoto as a MLB free agent. I think one big trade for the Mets and one big signing for the Mets, trickling in, maybe a middle of the road trade here and a couple of middle of the road signings there. That's where I see it when it comes to the rotation. Again, bullpen, you can give me 100 names. Doesn't matter. You could trade for Bednar. Wonderful. That doesn't mean he's going to be good with the Mets. Bullpens are a crapshoot. Show me who the Mets got at the end of the offseason to fill their bullpen, and I go, all right, let's go. Because a guy that had a 4 ERA this year can have a 2.5 ERA next year. So, we see it with Ottavino. We see it with a lot of players, a lot of bullpen arms. So, tell me the guys in a bullpen, and let's go. Hopefully, they're good. That's the way I see it. Next is DH. And I put one guy in there, 2 guys in the free agent targets. Obviously, Ohtani will be a DH, and Teoscar Hernandez, who didn't really work out much, but I think Teoscar Hernandez could be a really nice addition if the Mets do not get Ohtani in the DH spot. Teoscar Hernandez can be a perfect DH spot who could play a certain amount of positions as well if you want to give guys days off on the field and put him as the DH. But Teoscar Hernandez is going to be an interesting option when it comes to the DH spot for the New York Mets, which has been a huge problem for 2 years now. Ever since the DH has been implemented, has been a huge problem. We can go through the guys. We don't need to go through the guys. Vogelback cannot be part of the DH tandem. Can't happen. If you're going to go through a rotational situation with the DH spot, a platoon situation, I'd rather DH guys with the current lineup. Like, if you want to give Pete Alonso a day off on the field, let him DH. You want to give Lindor a day off at shortstop, let him DH. You want to give McNeil a day off, let him DH. That's the way it should happen if you don't get a guy like Teoscar Hernandez who can be almost your everyday DH. That's what I would do. JD Martinez and Justin Turner, that would be fine as well. But those are guys that are, getting up there in age that you just hope they don't get hurt. You can't have that one guy that, is up there in age, even though they had really good seasons. I don't know if you can trust a guy that's, getting up there in age and you're counting on them to be a guy that is protection for Pete Alonso. That's a dangerous game to play. Would I want that? Would I be okay with it? Sure. But I don't think those are the guys you can continue to put in every single day. JD Martinez had a really good season. So I don't think you got to worry about that a little bit, especially with his back. And Justin Turner is up there in age as well. Yeah, Yuki, you could say guys under 30, then you're gonna be in trouble. Like you can get guys over 30. It's not the end of the world. You know, a guy like JD Martinez, if the Mets I like JD Martinez because he can probably hit you 25 home runs. Well, great. You put him behind Pete Alonso, and hopefully it's enough protection. You just hope they don't get hurt. All right. So what else we got? Let me just see the. Well, Jay, it was. I didn't say the season was a disaster because it was a fun season, but September and the wild card was a disaster. The Mets lost the division in September because they couldn't hit, and then in the wild card they couldn't pitch. That was why it was a disaster. The season is not a disaster. The Mets didn't choke. The Atlanta Braves had a historic second half. The Mets were still 15 games over 500 in the second half. They didn't choke. The Braves just had a historic run. Yeah, I agree, Easy, 100%. Yeah, Patrick, I understand that, but everybody strikes out in baseball today. You're not looking for a guy behind Pete Alonso that that walks like Vogelback, right? You want a guy swinging the bat. Give me a strikeout guy that can hit 20 plus home runs that that teams worry about and might have to pitch to Pete Alonso and maybe make a mistake to Pete Alonso because they don't want to face a guy like Teoscar Hernandez. I don't know what the Mets are going to do with Marte. It depends. What are the Mets going to think? If the Mets decide, hey, look, if the Mets get trade for Juan Soto, well, Marte's irrelevant, right? I mean, can you put Marte in left field? Yeah. Can you put Juan Soto in left field? And look, if you get Juan Soto, you trade for Juan Soto, put Marte in right field and see what happens. You got Nimmo and Juan Soto in center and left. See if Marte can hold up. Because I don't think Marte's done. I just think Marte, with his 2 core surgeries, I think he was never fully healthy to play the season. I think he was trying to come back too early, and it was a detriment to the season. Because I don't see a guy within 1 year be too old to play baseball and was one of our best players last season. That usually doesn't happen. Usually it's a slow decline that you see slowly. I mean, this is a guy that batted almost 300 and was one of our best table setters and best clutch hitters in 2022. He couldn't just fall off the map in 2023 and just say, oh, he's old. I don't believe that at all. He had 2 major core surgeries that, remember, he didn't play a lot in spring training because he was still recovering. I think he came back too fast. And I'm not saying he re-injured himself, but I think that he put too much strain on those surgical repair core that caused him to have a bad season. I would give him a chance, especially if you get Juan Soto. Yeah, committee, but again, bullpen is a crapshoot. I don't care. You can name 20 guys, and you can't tell me the Mets bullpen will be great because the Mets get these guys. Because everybody wanted, again, Andrew Chafin last offseason, including myself. He was a disaster this year. Aaron Loop, who everybody was shocked the Mets didn't re-sign, was not good for the Angels. Bullpen arms are a crapshoot. Again, let David Stearns or whoever makes these moves, give me the guys at the end of the offseason. All right, these are the names in our bullpen. Great, let's run with it, right? I don't want Drew Smith back in the bullpen because I know he's a disaster. I don't think he's going to get better, right? But if you bring in 3 or 4 guys to add to Rayleigh and Diaz, okay, fine, let's run with it. Because you can't tell me that this guy, you can't get Josh Hader, David Bednar, and throw them all in the bullpen. Yeah, that's probably going to be a good bullpen, but that's probably very unlikely, right? Give me a couple of guys that David Stearns believes is going to be good in the bullpen, whatever they use as analytics or stats or how they use it, the metrics, and say, this is what I think is going to be a good bullpen, and run with it. Again, you don't need, the Phillies are a prime example. The Phillies had one of the worst bullpens last year. Yet they were one of the best bullpens in the playoffs. You know why? Because they traded for guys at the deadline. The bullpen doesn't have to be fixed this offseason right away. If you see that it's a problem throughout the first part of the couple of months of the season, that's why you have a trade deadline to work on that. And I don't want Conforto back. That's been there, done it. Muted? Maybe. But the Mets didn't hit at all except for game 2. Game 1, they never hit. Right? I mean, didn't help that Scherzer, was throwing batting practice. Oh, by the way, how did Scherzer do yesterday? Right? Another big game Scherzer performance, and he came up very, very small. The Mets completely won that trade. Completely. The Rangers can win the World Series. The Mets won that trade. Joe, I'm telling you right now, I'm telling you right now, he's not going to the Los Angeles Dodgers. I'm telling you that right now. Book it, bookmark it, video it, put it into a short, remix it. I don't care. Remember these words. Shohei Ohtani is not going to be in the Los Angeles Dodgers because that's all you heard. Oh, he's going to LA Dodgers, going to the Dodgers, going to the Dodgers. He's not going to end up with the Dodgers. I guarantee you he's going to end up somewhere else. Now, I'm not claiming he's going to be with the Mets, but I would be shocked if the Mets don't have the highest offer. Yeah, I agree. I understand that, committee, but I understand that. But, if you really look at Dominic Leone's numbers as a Met, he was actually pretty good. He was actually a lot better than what we had. Right? I understand, with Gott and everything like that. But again, Gott can come back next year and be one of our better middle relievers. Right? It's a crapshoot. Right? It's a complete crapshoot. Again, Andrew Chafin was one of my top targets for a bullpen, and he was a disaster. The Diamondbacks couldn't wait to trade him. Why would Teoscar Hernandez get a long-term deal? Why would he get a long-term deal? Pete Alonso struck out 200 times. Are you going to give him a long-term deal? Brandon Nimmo struck out 200 times. Why do we give him an 8-year deal? Lindor struck out 200 times. Why do we give him a 10-year deal? Almost every good player strikes out 200 times. Yeah, easy. Gott stinks. Yeah, sure. Fine. That's fine. Edwin Diaz sucked in 2019. We thought he was going to be a disaster. He was one of the best players in baseball in 2022. Best pitchers in baseball. Admit what, Patrick? Wrong about what? You know how many players get massive long-term deals that strike out 200 times? A lot of them. I mean, name me a free agent that doesn't strike out 200 times, a top player. I mean, do you want a 300 hitter that hits 2 home runs? I mean, then Jeff McNeil should get a $200 million contract because he strikes out less, right? I mean, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't work like that in baseball anymore, unfortunately. Yeah, well, Trevor May retired, so he ain't coming back. I mean, look at it. The Phillies closer is Craig Kimbrell. He hasn't been good in like 3 years. So it really, again, the bullpens are a crapshoot. Do I want certain arms? Absolutely. If the Mets can trade for David Bednar, that'd be great. I mean, having that 1-2 punch in the 8th and 9th would be deadly. But who's to say Craig Kimbrell is one of the better closers in the postseason right now? How does that make sense? I mean, Joe, if he does, I think the Angels are terrible, and I don't think he's going to sing. Joe, I'll probably do a free agent predictions for the Mets. I don't know if I'm going to do a full, maybe top 10 free agent video. No, I did not compare Gott to Diaz. The fact of the matter is, Diaz was one of the worst relievers in baseball in 2019 and one of the worst closers in baseball. And not even 3 years later, he was the best closer in baseball. Actually, no, it wasn't. Because Diaz blew more games than Gott ever did. Diaz, every time he came in 2019, was a disaster. Complete disaster. But again, putting Diaz and Gott on the same level is not fair for Gott. Like, let's be honest. Right? But that doesn't mean Gott can't have a 3.5 ERA instead of a 5 ERA. Right? I mean, a 3.5 ERA compared to what he had at a 5.5 ERA is a huge difference. Again, I go back to the Phillies bullpen. The Phillies didn't make a ton of moves in the bullpen in last season. They made 2 moves in the bullpen, and it meant everything. But it was bullpen arms that they already had in the bullpen that pitched better. Yeah, see, I don't know if the Rays would do that yet. What he has 2 more years left on his deal, on his deal before he becomes a free agent. Well, I mean, Patrick, who do you want to give big contracts to? Because everybody strikes out 200 times. And the players that don't strike out 200 times are not power hitters. Power hitters strike out. Like, well, I mean, committee, I agree. But there's nothing that the Mets and Steve Cohen can do now, right? The Wilpons were cheap. Brody, I mean, they did it with Reyes as well, right? They didn't even offer a contract. I don't think Wheeler wanted to stay, but I think he would have stayed if the number was close. But what are you gonna do? Unfortunately, Cohen wasn't the owner yet. Unfortunately. So, all right, guys. So, outfield situation. The reason why I bring that up is obviously the Juan Soto situation with the trade. Maybe the Mets would do that. It's interesting because you got right now you have Mauricio and Beatty. Are you going to keep, can McNeil move over to left field? And you put Mauricio at second, leave Beatty at third? Are the Mets going to do that? No, easy. Diaz's problem was mental. Wasn't the stuff. It was mental. It was clearly mental. You talk about Gott's demeanor. Diaz's demeanor looked like a scared puppy in the corner. That the Diaz was. Did you go back to 2019? Again, I go back to the Dodger series in 2019 where he was blowing leads and blowing games. That is a guy, I'm telling you. That is a guy that was mentally effed up in the head. Mentally. And again, kudos to him. He fixed it. He changed it around. And good. Muted, he might be. But I don't think this is not David Stern's players and prospects, right? That's why if David Stern doesn't believe in Beatty, well, then he's not going to. But I'm going on what we know about our prospects right now. Just because Beatty's been bad, he was bad last year and bad when the Mets brought him up in 2022, doesn't mean he's going to be a bad player. Again, we don't need Beatty. Again, this is where people are confused. You're not going to have all-stars at every position. You need guys that can be supplemental players, table setters, right? You got a guy like Jeff McNeil, great. If Brett Beatty becomes a table setter, that's great. I'm fine with that. That's okay because you got a guy in Francisco Alvarez that everybody seems to forget that can hit 30 home runs as well. No, but again, you're comparing Diaz to Gott. That's not fair to Gott. Like Diaz, had 50-something saves in Seattle, and he was a disaster in 2019. But we'll see. The fact of the matter is, the Mets Here's what the Mets have and David Stearns has, which the Mets did not have the past 2 off seasons and basically the last trade deadline, right? They got options. You know why they have options? Because now they got a ton of prospects in the farm system. Again, David Stein's got to evaluate which ones he wants to keep and which ones are going to be trade chips. Because you can't keep them all. Doesn't make sense to keep them all. At some point, you got to pull a trigger. Even if it's guys that Met fans believe that they shouldn't trade, too bad. Trust David Stern and trust what he's going to do, right? There was not a lot of Met fans, if any, that didn't want David Stearns. Just because he's going to make a move, because there will be a move, free agent signing or trade, that you're not going to like. And all of a sudden you're going to turn on the guy and say he's an asshole and he's a piece of crap and he doesn't know what he's doing. Okay, Patrick, but I mean, there's not a lot of guys that don't strike out 200 times. Like, I mean, you got to get over that. Like, have you been watching baseball? Like, again, I don't like that these players strike out a lot. Put the bat on the ball. Right? The Mets were so successful last year because they struck out less and they put the bat on the ball with higher averages. I love that. But that's not what baseball is. Again, look at Kyle Schwarber. He batted 198. He hit 45 home runs. And he's leading off in the Phillies, and nobody's complaining about him. I mean, do the Phillies have table setters or do they have mashers? Castellanos, over 200 strikeouts. Bryce Harper, over 200 strikeouts. Schwarber, over 200 strikeouts. Yet they're in the NLCS 2 games away from the World Series. Well, Patrick, but that's baseball now. Look, I agree with you. I don't like that these players strike out so much, but this is the baseball that we have now. It's not going to change anymore, or at least for the time being. That's why if you're so stuck on, I don't want a guy with 200 strikeouts, well, good luck finding a player that is any good that doesn't strike out. Oh, that was a bad move. Oh, they got him out of Diamond. That was stupid from Gurriel right there. Oh, well. But again, again, okay, that's fine. But again, you're not going to have an all-star at every position. Patrick, I think your problem is you want an all-star at every position that strikes out 100 times. Good luck finding that. Pete Alonso strikes out 200 times. Do you want to get rid of Pete Alonso? Let's get rid of Nimmo and Lindor and Alonso because they strike out over 200 times. It just doesn't make sense. I didn't say Teoscar Hernandez is Mike Trout, but if you have Pete Alonso that everybody loves and is a masher, you got Alvarez that's can hit you 30 home runs, 35, 30 home runs. And you got Lindor that's a 30-30 guy. And Nimmo, who's your leadoff guy. Teoscar Hernandez could be that not necessarily table setter, but could be a guy that could work well with this lineup. I mean, who do you want? Like, I mean, you're not giving me names. Like, yeah, you want Mike. Okay, let's get Ohtani. Let's get Mike Trout. You know what? Hey, let's ask the Yankees for Aaron Judge. How about that? You know what? While we're at it, let's ask the Phillies for Trey Turner. I mean, it's impossible to have all-stars at every position. Again, the Phillies are 2 wins away from a World Series, and they have Kyle Schwarber batting 198 with 46 home runs, and that's their leadoff hitter. You know, Nick Castellanos is a good player, but he's a beast in the playoffs. Yeah, but I didn't say Teoscar Hernandez is Mike Trout. You said that. I didn't. I'm saying Teoscar Hernandez could be a good supplemental player for this lineup. Again, do you look? I love 300. Give me 290 hitters, 300 hitters across the board. I take that over. Give me guys that bat 300 and hit 25 home runs than a guy that bats 198 and gives me 45 home runs. Because yeah, that's nice hitting home runs, but if you don't have guys that can get on base, it's pointless because he's going to hit a lot of solo home runs. Yeah, Michael, I agree. It's worked. It's unconventional, but it's worked for the Phillies. But you can't tell me that they get hot in the playoffs. It doesn't work a lot during the season because unless they're winning 100 games, it's working in the playoffs. Like, I don't know how it's working in the playoffs, but it's working. Okay, that's Patrick. But again, you're not having Teoscar Hernandez leading off. All right, you're having a guy that you want to have probably 6th in your lineup or 7th in your lineup, or a guy that I don't think Teoscar Hernandez is going to be a guy you can put behind Pete Alonso. But if he's a guy that can hit a decent amount of home runs, that teams can say, all right, well, we got to worry about Teoscar Hernandez as well. Again, on base percentages, okay, I don't, I like that stat, but again, you want every player to have every great stat. Every team doesn't have that. No team has that. All right, you have a guy, like I said, Kyle Schwarber strikes out 250 times, bat under 200, yet I don't hear Philly fans complaining about him. Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah. I mean, Trey Turner is your perfect leadoff hitter. The Phillies are 2 wins away from a World Series. You have Kyle Schwarber leading off. Makes no sense, but it works. Again, sometimes if you believe in this core, you need supplemental players. You need table setters. Right? The reason why the Mets were so good was because Nimmo was an on-base machine leading off. You had Marte, who was that table setter that has a little bit of pop. And then you had Lindor and Alonso. That was a great 1 through 4. Remember, Buck Showalter never changed that 1 through 4 almost throughout the entire season in 2022. This year, it was, with Marte being injured and not playing well, it was a mishmash of players. And the Diamondbacks just take game 3, and the series are 2-1. Go Snakes. All right. Yeah. Woohoo. Yeah. Now, if the Phillies lose, I mean, that's just a blessing, right? Dodgers lose, Braves lose, Phillies lose. But we'll see how that goes. All right, guys. So let's finish up with third base. Who do you want is the third baseman? There's some talk about, I didn't even put him on the screen in a possible free agent target. Would the Mets go after Matt Chapman? That would be interesting because that can solve basically every issue. You bring in Matt Chapman, play third, really good defensively, damn good hitter. That's a solid guy in the middle of your lineup, right? Move Mauricio to second base, McNeil to left field. You kind of have your outfield if you're thinking about keeping Marte in right field or, getting, I'll tell you, Oscar Hernandez, something like that. Well, Patrick, that was the Mets lineup this year. You know how many times Pete Alonso went 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts on high-end pitching? You know how many times Lindor did that? Nimmo did that? Every player does that at least a couple of times. I mean, you don't like anybody. I mean, why play baseball? So it is interesting. I wonder if the Mets would think about signing Matt Chapman. Yeah, I know, Mike, low average. That's, again, there's not a lot of guys with high averages, guys. I mean, it's just not. It's just good luck finding that. There's not a lot of them. There's really not. But if Matt Chapman is a guy that can hit you, I'm not sure how many home runs he had this year. If I could pull it up really quick before we call it a night. Let me see. I think he had a decent season. Let me see. Sorry, guys. Let me just run. It's what happens when you're live sometimes. He batted .240, better than Pete Alonso, right? If we're going to talk about average, he had a better average. He had 17 home runs this year. Let's see. He played 140 games. Struck out 165 times. Well, Patrick, you should like him. He didn't hit strike out over 200 times. On base 330, not bad. Slugging 424, OPS 755, not great. I'm not sure where he batted in the lineup for the Blue Jays, but 17 home runs, 2021, 2022, had 27 home runs. I mean, he's averaging around 29 home runs in averaging 162 game season. So, you could think that kind of an offseason this year, he's about a 25 home run guy. Again, David Stearns, if you haven't noticed with the Brewers, he's pitching oriented and power oriented. That's what is a mainstay with the Brewers. That's what he focused on a lot with the Brewers. Not high average guys, a lot of power, really damn good pitching, bullpen and starting pitching. That's what he's known for. So if you like average, David Stearns is not your guy. That doesn't mean that Pete Alonso, Lindor can't hit 260, 270, which if Lindor hits 28 to 30 home runs, 260 is fine with 95 RBIs. Pete Alonso, he hits 45 home runs, batting 250, I'll take with 100 plus RBIs. So, I think Chapman is a pretty good clutch player. Adding him to this line, again, it's just we're just spitballing here, because that could change a lot of situations. That means Beatty is expendable in a possible trade, putting him in a package. Mauricio can go to second base, be your second base. McNeil can go to left field. I like McNeil in left field. He's a pretty good outfielder. That is something to look at. So we got through our top 5 needs. Rotation number 1, bullpen number 2. DH, very important. Be very interested in what the Mets are going to do there. Outfield is kind of up in the air because we really don't know. Mets might trade for Juan Soto. Maybe a situation with Teoscar Hernandez. Maybe the Mets look elsewhere for an outfielder. A solid defensive guy that doesn't really is really that good with the bat. That's an interesting thing. Third base could be an interesting option as well. So top 5 needs, 1 and 2 is definitely rotation and bullpen. Obviously, your top free agent targets, a lot of pitching on there. Your top trade targets, a lot of pitching on there as well. So once again, guys, thank you for tuning in to another Mets Offseason Report right here on Talking Mets with Rob. If you're a new subscriber of the channel, keep on coming back for more. A long offseason for our New York Mets. A lot of work to do. We need a manager. Possibly we need a GM. We need a lot of rotation help, a lot of bullpen help. Let's see what David Stearns does to make this team competitive in 2024. MLB hot stove, Mets hot stove, MLB free agent frenzy. A lot of live streams, a lot of work to do throughout the season. With that said, guys, Candelario is not a bad idea, Henry. He was really good when he was traded from the Nationals. Really, really good. I believe for the Cubs. Cubs didn't make the playoffs, but he was one of their best hitters down the stretch. He's interested for sure. So with that said, guys, thank you for tuning in to Mets Offseason Report. I'll see you next time, guys. As always, Mets fans, let's go Mets. Have a great night, guys.